Chad Pergram, our senior Capitol Hill correspondent, back on the Hill this morning. Chad, where do we stand?
Well, we're waiting to see what happens early this afternoon. The Senate Republican Conference, they'll have a meeting and get everybody together in the early afternoon. I was told that one goal would be to have a test vote sometime this afternoon. I'm also told that they might not put that on the floor if they don't think that they have the votes. Now, in order to, get across the barricade there and get across the test vote, they need 60 yeas. That means they have to persuade Democrats. And I talked to some Democrats last night who were still a little bit on the fence about this. I mean, you've had this coterie of John Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania, Angus King, the independent from Maine, and Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada, who've all voted on these other, test votes before throughout September into October, but they've never moved the ball. The other issue here that might be the holdup is we still don't have bill text. Bill text, and this would deal with funding the government, reopening the government until the end of January. It would also fund the Department of Agriculture, the Congress, and the Department of Veterans Affairs for the entire fiscal year through next fall. And so they think that they might be able to pluck off some Democrats there, and it's about the math. You have to get 60 votes. If they get 60 votes, that will be a signal that it's only a matter of time that the Senate will pass that bill, and eventually the government will probably reopen. But just the fact that there's not bill text yet, that tells me a lot that this is still in this stasis.
Does that mean that the possible Democrat senators who could cross over, like you mentioned, Cortez Masto, Fetterman, and King, of course, but I know that, we're looking at people like Gary Peters, Maggie Hassan, John Ossoff, who Kevin McCarthy was pointing out, he has the Atlanta airport, one of the largest in the country there. Are these senators that are possibly fence sitters waiting to see the actual language and then really indicate whether or not they're willing to cross?
Certainly, but Democrats say, there's still no agreement on health care, and that's what they've been holding out on. And this is going to be the real, dirty politics of this. Let's say you have a group of Democrats who say, look, there's so much pressure to reopen the government. We're getting some things on the spending bills that we want, and for the good of the country, we're going to vote yes on the procedural vote. Doesn't mean they're going to vote yes on the underlying bill. They get across the procedural vote. And unlike in March, you're not going to have the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, supporting this. These are going to be rank-and-file members for the most part. The dirty part of this on the Democratic side of the aisle for them is that you might have these Democrats say, look, we're going to vote to open the government, and there was nothing on health care. And what does that do for the progressives and House Democrats who are just absolutely raging at Senate Democrats to say, you really threw us under the bus here? They felt that that was what happened with Chuck Schumer back in March. Again, he probably won't vote to break that filibuster. Right. But if you have those others, you're going to have that internal clash inside the Democratic Party, and that is going to be nasty.
Yeah, so, of course, he can't vote for that because he's worried about a threat from his left in a primary challenge. But the last salvo we saw that we know about, really, was Chuck Schumer's proposal for extending the subsidies for a year. It was a pretty audacious proposal and probably one that every Republican kind of laughed at. But I sort of wondered whether or not maybe that might be sort of a negotiating tool, because he's hoping that, well, maybe we start here and then whittle back from there. Do you get any sense of that, Chad?
Absolutely, because, some Democrats will say, OK, let's talk about, possible fraud in this, or how can we reform this, make this better. But, just don't cut people off right away. Keep this open for a year, and that might be an opening negotiating point. But here's the other thing that's happened on the Republican side of the aisle. They have used this, and if you watch the floor speeches in the Senate yesterday, as an opportunity to completely relitigate Obamacare. Remember that in 2010, when they finally passed the final version of that in March of 2010, all we heard for years was that Republicans, once they got the House back and they got the Senate, they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. They were never successful in so doing. So what they're doing now, we're almost back in a time machine, 2010, 2012, where they're talking about, from their perspective, how bad Obamacare has been, the problems with it, how you have to subsidize this. It might be an opportunity to fix that program. But there's a lot of Republicans also, when you talk to them off to the side. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, has been very vocal about this herself, but saying, this affects so many people in my state, so many people in my district. We just can't cut these people off because these premium spikes are through the roof. So that is a negotiating point. But on the other side of the ball here, you've had the president saying, let's get the insurance companies out of it. Let's send money directly, a subsidy perhaps, directly to people to buy insurance. Whether or not that would work, I don't know. But that's the idea here. And so, again, this is where I say I'm in a time machine, and they're talking like it's 2010, 2011 again about Obamacare and trying to talk about what a problem it was from their perspective.
Yeah. Well, Chad, if you're the insurance companies, this is a president who might actually take that money that would go to them and give it back to the people. He's been tweeting out that Obamacare sucks. He also said that the Republicans must blow up the filibuster and approve hundreds of long-sought but never forgotten policy wins. As just a small example, voter ID, which is, by the way, very popular to reform our election. So a lot of people who voted for President Trump are saying, yeah, why don't they get rid of the filibuster and we can pass all this stuff and reopen the government? Do you think this is a threat that the Democrats are taking seriously?
A couple things there. It's about the math on that, too. They don't have the votes to undo the filibuster. There's a lot of Republicans who are resistant to that, and it would be a question, do they get rid of the filibuster for all legislation, or is it something narrow for appropriations bills, or to just reopen the government? Or in this particular instance, you could craft a resolution to do a nuclear option and alter the filibuster and do it specifically saying, because we need to open the government here in November of 2025. You could do it with that level of specificity. Okay, that might be one option if we go another 2 or 3 weeks with a government shutdown. But here's the other thing. I think that a lot of members are very suspect about this on both sides of the aisle. And the other thing I thought that was interesting is that the president has said this, and you know that most Republicans in the Senate are in pretty much lockstep with President Trump. But this is the one issue where he has been resisted. They have resisted him. And so it's something that just isn't flying yet in the Senate and may never fly at this stage. And I think that's very interesting that that's the one thing that he has harped on, with these Senate Republicans, maybe trying to gin up some support there. But so far it hasn't worked.
So, Chad, we have to go. But real quickly, if you were to guess what that number would be among Republicans right now in the Senate who would resist pulling the trigger on abolishing the filibuster, how many Republicans would that be?
I think you're a good 10 to 15 away minimum, and probably many more. And again, it depends on the specific question. Is it for appropriations bills? Is it for all legislation? That number would change and be in flux based on that.
Well, and there's a lot of debate, obviously, just starting now, that you could actually carve out a narrow legislative lane and not apply to other legislation, whereas the previous nuking of the filibuster was on the executive
But once you crack that door, Griff, that's what they're worried about. Once
the door has already been cracked
on the legislative side, you see. But the door has been cracked on nominations, never on legislation. So once they cross that Rubicon into legislation, that's a very different piece of turf.
As always, Chad Pergram, excellent coverage. Bring anything you have to us as the news warrants. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.